It's more than a debate, it's a generational clash, a battle of visions, and a moment that shook the nation. On one side, Michelle Obama, the voice of compassion and legacy. On the other, Caroline Leavitt, fearless, sharp, and unrelenting. What began as a policy discussion quickly turned into a war of words that left the nation breathless. The Liberty Auditorium pulsed with tension, a historic hall turned battleground under the glare of global cameras. The stage, framed by towering red, white, and blue LED panels, bore the weight of a nation divided. Centered beneath the spotlight sat two women, emblems of two Americas. On the left, Michelle Obama, draped in a slate gray pantsuit, her hands folded gracefully in her lap, her eyes calm but alert. On the right, Caroline Leavitt, dressed in a sharp black suit with a crimson blouse, hands firm on the table, her gaze fixed like a drawn arrow. The moderator, Dr. Celeste Monroe, stood between them at a podium carved with the forum's crest. "Welcome to the 2025 American Leadership Forum," she began, her voice steady but tight, "where truth, policy, and courage will be tested on live stage tonight." Then, without warning, the moment that set the tone for the night arrived. A clip rolled across the giant screen behind them, Michelle Obama on the view, laughing slightly, then saying with cutting clarity, "Donald Trump? He governed like a bully, hid behind fear, and left America more divided than ever." The clip ended, but the tension didn't. Caroline didn't wait for a cue. She leaned forward, her voice slicing through the auditorium. "And your husband governed like a ghost. Smiles, speeches, and 8 years of decline. I'm here to say it plainly, hope isn't enough anymore." A hush fell. Then a surge of reaction. Half the crowd erupted in cheers, the other half gasped or groaned. Michelle didn't flinch. Her voice, when it came, was calm. "Facts matter, Caroline. Shouting doesn't make them truer." But Caroline wasn't here to whisper. "Then let's speak in truth," she said, reaching for a folder at her side. "I brought receipts." The moderator tried to intervene, but it was already too late. The night had ignited. America wasn't watching a debate, they were watching a collision. The storm had begun, and neither woman looked ready to blink. Under the crushing lights and the weight of millions of watching eyes, this wasn't a conversation, it was war in slow motion, and the first blow had just landed. Hours before the debate began, Chicago's streets were already humming with unrest. Protesters waved banners on both sides of the boulevard outside the Liberty Auditorium, some holding signs that read, "Truth over Trump," while others chanted, "Leavitt for America." Helicopter blades cut through the sky as major networks set up their camera crews, knowing something electric was brewing. Inside the auditorium, technicians tested lights and sound, stage managers adjusted mic levels, and the tension among staff felt almost cinematic, like everyone knew tonight would be replayed for decades to come. Backstage, Michelle Obama sat in a quiet dressing room lined with soft lights and exposed brick. A single makeup artist finished final touches as Michelle scrolled through her notes one last time. Her expression wasn't nervous. It was meditative. She knew this wasn't a policy debate. It was personal. Caroline Leavitt had built her reputation on tearing down everything Michelle and Barack represented. "Don't lose your calm," one aide whispered. "She wants you rattled." Michelle gave a small nod, slipping her talking points into a slim folder and rising to adjust her blazer. Down the hall, Caroline Leavitt's energy was a different storm. She stood alone in front of a tall mirror, her black blazer crisp, her hair pulled back with purpose. A Fox News producer had just sent her a fresh polling report, Republican base approval soaring after her last appearance. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct line, Donald Trump. Caroline picked up, and his voice was unmistakable. "Crush her," he said simply. "Don't just defend me, expose her." Caroline smiled faintly, slipping her phone back into her jacket pocket. She grabbed a thick red folder packed with ICE data, crime reports, and prepared rebuttals. "Let's get to work," she said to no one in particular. In the center of it all, Dr. Celeste Monroe reviewed her opening remarks with the production team. A respected Stanford law scholar known for her restraint, she knew tonight would test more than her ability to moderate. It would test the nation's appetite for civility. "I need a 10-second delay on all feeds," she told the director. just in case. As the countdown clock struck 15 minutes to air, she took her place behind the podium, her fingers tightening on the edge. The lights dimmed, the crowd filed in, and far above the auditorium, in homes across America, millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens. They didn't know it yet, but history was about to unfold in real time. The lights burned brighter as Dr. Celeste Monroe took center stage, her voice firm but even as she addressed the packed auditorium and the millions watching worldwide. Tonight's debate will center around leadership, legacy, and the future of American values, she began. Each participant will have 2 uninterrupted minutes to open. Her words barely settled before Michelle Obama leaned forward, her tone calm, her cadence deliberate. America isn't just a country, she said, it's a promise. And that promise has been bruised by fear-based leadership, cruelty in policy, and a rising comfort with division. She didn't say Trump's name, but she didn't have to. We need to remember our shared humanity. Unity isn't a weakness, it's the only way forward. The room murmured with quiet agreement, until Caroline Leavitt sat forward, her hands steepled, her voice sharp and surgically precise. Mrs. Obama speaks of unity, she said. But where was that unity under Barack? Under him we saw record division, racial riots, economic stagnation, and a border left wide open. Don't lecture us on unity. President Trump didn't just talk about America, he rebuilt it. Her words hit like a slap. The audience cracked in half cheering, half booing. Dr. Monroe raised a hand to quiet the noise, but Caroline pressed on. You say unity, I say safety. Trump prioritized Americans. Your husband prioritized headlines. Michelle's expression didn't shift, but her response carried weight. Facts matter, Ms. Leavitt. Under Barack, this country recovered from the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Millions gained health care. Millions found dignity. That's not a headline, it's change. She turned slightly toward the audience, her voice softer. And as for riots, those weren't random. They were people begging to be heard. Leadership listens, it doesn't suppress. Caroline's eyes narrowed. Begging to be heard by burning cities, she shot back. Trump brought law and order. Your husband let chaos reign because it was politically convenient. That's not listening, that's abandoning. The crowd again reacted in waves. A veteran in the front row nodded vigorously at Caroline's words, while a young woman near the back shook her head in disbelief. Dr. Monroe tried to reestablish control. Let's move. But Caroline raised a hand. One more point, if I may. She didn't wait for approval. You talk about restoring dignity. Tell that to the families of victims killed by illegal immigrants allowed in under Barack's policies. Trump shut that door. That's what real leadership looks like. Michelle took a slow breath. Leadership doesn't mean closing doors. It means building bridges without burning others in the process. My husband did that. He united allies, expanded health care, uplifted communities. You call that weakness? I call it wisdom. The crowd clapped louder this time, but Caroline wasn't fazed. And what did it get us? Empty slogans and broken systems. Trump didn't bring pretty speeches, he brought results. Round 1 had begun not with questions but with declarations, fired like warning shots in a war of futures. 2 women, 2 Americas, and the audience, both in the auditorium and across living rooms, phones, and live streams, were no longer spectators, they were witnesses to the widening fault line running straight through the heart of the nation. Dr. Celeste Monroe cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the charged air. Let's move now to the question of immigration and border security, a topic that has divided not only parties but families. She turned toward Michelle Obama. Mrs. Obama, your response to current immigration policy? Michelle didn't hesitate. Immigration is more than numbers. It's people, families, children, workers, dreamers. Under Trump, we saw children ripped from their parents' arms. We saw cruelty turned into performance. You cannot call that national security. It's state-sponsored trauma. Her voice didn't rise, but it hit with deliberate weight. My question to those who defend this approach is, what kind of country are we becoming when we use fear to justify inhumanity? The applause was immediate. But Caroline Leavitt was already moving. She pulled a folder from beneath the desk, flipping it open and holding up a paper toward the cameras. "What kind of country?" she repeated, voice crisp. "The kind that protects its own." She stood, her tone now razor-sharp. "This is a 2024 ICE report. 1,168 criminal aliens removed in 1 year under President Trump. Assault, human trafficking, repeat offenses. You call that fear-mongering? I call it doing what Barack never had the guts to do. Act." She tossed the report onto the table. It landed between them like a gauntlet. Michelle met her gaze unshaken. "So, you're proud of tearing families apart in the name of optics?" she said slowly. "Proud of dragging toddlers into detention camps with aluminum blankets? These are lives, Caroline. Children, not just statistics." Caroline didn't blink. "And what about the American children who didn't get to grow up because their parents were murdered by someone Barack's administration let through the cracks? You call it optics, I call it blood on your hands." Gasps echoed from the crowd, followed by scattered shouts, some cheering, others outraged. Dr. Monroe tried to restore calm, but the dam had cracked. Caroline turned to the audience. "Ask the parents of Kayla Gomez or Grant Ronebeck. Ask them if Obama's border policy protected them, because President Trump fixed what your husband ignored." Michelle's voice was quieter now, but no less powerful. "And how many good people, people who fled violence or poverty, were treated like criminals, caged and discarded, under Trump? You don't stop crime by destroying humanity. You stop it with smart reform and compassion." Caroline laughed coldly. "Compassion doesn't bring back dead Americans, Michelle. It brings loopholes. It brings weakness." She turned again to Dr. Monroe. "You want numbers? I've got them. Over 200,000 illegal border crossings in Obama's last year. Trump cut that by half in 2 years. That's not just a stat, that's national survival." Michelle shook her head, her voice finally rising. "That's not survival. That's scapegoating. That's fear, plain and simple. You want to talk about numbers? Fine. Under Obama, DACA protected nearly 700,000 young people who now contribute to our economy and serve in our military. Trump tried to rip that away. For what? A border wall that didn't even get finished?" The crowd erupted again, two Americas roaring back at each other across one auditorium. Dr. Monroe pounded her palm on the podium. "Enough!" But Caroline leaned forward one last time, eyes burning. "I'd rather build a wall that saves Americans than build a legacy of empty hope that buries them." Michelle, lips tight, stared across the table. "And I'd rather live in a nation that lifts up families than one that weaponizes them for applause." The debate had ceased being policy, it was now battle philosophy, humanity versus hardline, fear versus protection, and no one in that room could look away. Dr. Monroe tried once more to steady the room. Her voice, though calm, carried urgency. "Let's bring this conversation to the families at the center of this debate. How do your respective administrations define protection, and who are we protecting?" Michelle Obama leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the crowd, her voice now softer but weightier. "I met a mother in Arizona. Her name was Marisol. She worked 2 jobs, had no criminal record, raised 2 children who were both honor students. She was taken in an ICE raid at 5 a.m. barefoot, no warning. Her sons came home to an empty house." She paused, letting the silence land. "That's what these policies do. They don't just deport, they devastate." Her voice didn't crack, but the tremor in the audience did. A woman in the third row wiped tears, another clutched her partner's hand. But Caroline Leavitt was unmoved. Her voice came like flint on steel. "And I met a father in Ohio," she said, rising to her feet, "whose daughter, 8 years old, was killed by an illegal immigrant with 3 prior arrests. He asked me, why was he still here? You talk about devastation, Michelle. Let's not pretend it's one-sided." She pulled another sheet from her folder. "Do you want names? I've got 37 American families who lost loved ones in just 1 year. Victims of crimes committed by people who shouldn't have been here in the first place." Michelle looked up slowly. "You're turning grief into a weapon," she said, voice tight. "These families suffered, But so did the families separated by force and fear under Trump's zero-tolerance policy. This isn't a contest of who can hurt more. It's about the policies that create hurt. Caroline stepped closer, placing the document in front of Michelle on the table. "What hurts is pretending that tragedy has only one face," she snapped. "And what's even worse is leading a country as if feelings are facts. You want to heal the country? Start by protecting it." The audience was now on edge, some on their feet, others frozen, like witnesses to a slow-motion collision. Dr. Monroe tried again to steer the conversation back to the policy, but the two women were locked in, speaking now less to each other and more through each other, to the country itself. Michelle leaned in. "And what do you say to the children who watched their parents taken away with no warning, who learned to fear the knock on the door?" She turned toward the crowd. "Leadership is more than strength. It's knowing when to choose mercy over might." Karoline smirked. "And mercy without borders leads to chaos. You don't fix a broken house by leaving the front door open." She pointed at Michelle. "You talk about fear like it's a weakness, but for many Americans, fear is what wakes them up at night. Fear of crime, fear of losing jobs, fear of being forgotten by politicians like your husband, who gave speeches and left small towns to rot." Michelle's composure flickered. "Barack didn't abandon this country. He gave it dignity. He brought hope when there was none." Caroline shot back instantly. "Hope didn't stop MS-13. Hope didn't stop opioid deaths in sanctuary cities. Trump took action. You wrote poetry." The auditorium groaned, roared, clapped. One side yelling, "Truth!" the other, "Shame!" Dr. Monroe looked exhausted. "We need to return to civility," she said, almost pleading. But the gloves were off. Michelle, her voice lower, steadier now, looked directly at Caroline. "This isn't about who can shout louder. This is about who can lead without losing their soul." She gestured to the audience. "And you don't lead by dividing people into villains and victims. You lead by listening, even when it's uncomfortable." But Caroline wasn't finished. "I listen just fine," she said. "I just don't cry on cue. The people I fight for don't need lullabies. They need jobs, safety, and truth. That's what Trump delivered, and that's what your husband forgot." The crowd erupted once more, a perfect storm of grief, fury, defiance, and loyalty. It was no longer a discussion, it was a reckoning, and America was hanging on every word. The atmosphere in the Liberty Auditorium had shifted from argument to escalation. After the emotional volley on families, Dr. Monroe redirected the conversation with visible strain in her voice. "Let's address the heart of this debate, truth. What do you say to critics who claim that emotion has replaced facts in modern leadership?" Michelle Obama inhaled deeply, then spoke with calm precision. "Emotion doesn't replace truth. It gives it meaning. We are not spreadsheets and reports. We are people. And people don't live in data. They live in neighborhoods, in classrooms, in fear, in hope. If your truth cannot make room for compassion, then maybe it's incomplete." Her words were met with thoughtful nods from parts of the audience, the kind of silence that meant her message had pierced through the noise. Caroline Leavitt, however, was already shaking her head. "That sounds poetic, Michelle," she said, her voice dripping with composed disdain. "But it's not leadership. It's sentimentality. You're defending 8 years of stagnation with speeches that feel good but fix nothing." She turned slightly toward the camera, her expression sharpened. "You say people don't live in data. Tell that to the 5.5 million Americans who lost jobs under Obama's first 2 years. Tell it to small business owners crushed by Obamacare's mandates. You brought inspiration, Trump brought improvement." Michelle leaned forward slightly, not rattled but clearly ready to push back. "And yet millions gained health care for the first time under that same law. Millions found security they'd never known. That's not a statistic. That's a mother able to afford treatment for her child. That's dignity." Her voice swelled. "What you call sentiment, I call the soul of a nation." Caroline scoffed. "And what good is soul without spine?" she snapped. "You want to govern with feelings? I'll take solutions. You tear up over stories while Trump cut unemployment to record lows. You want unity, but Trump gave results. People don't want bedtime stories. They want jobs, security, and a country that doesn't apologize for protecting itself. The room stirred again, torn between two worldviews. Dr. Monroe, sensing a chance to regain balance, interjected, "Is there room for both? For empathy and execution?" But Caroline didn't wait. "Not when one cripples the other," she said. "Empathy can't be an excuse for inaction. You cry while the border burns." Michelle's tone cooled. Empathy is never an excuse, it's a responsibility. And without it, we become what we fear most, a nation that forgets its own heart. She paused, eyes scanning the audience. "I'm not ashamed of compassion, I'm proud of it." Caroline didn't blink. "Then be proud," she said. "But don't confuse compassion with competence. President Trump didn't cry, he acted. And because he did, this country stood stronger. While your husband stood still, Trump built something." Michelle stared back, no longer trying to convert, just to be heard. Leadership without empathy is tyranny with manners, and America deserves better than that. For the first time that night, neither side clapped. They just sat, silent, uneasy, grappling with the growing realization that this wasn't a debate about facts or feelings, it was about what kind of country they wanted to be. Dr. Celeste Monroe stood at the center of the storm, her grip tightening around the edge of her podium. For nearly an hour she had weathered the verbal crossfire, facts clashing with fury, empathy with statistics, but now, even her renowned restraint began to crack. She glanced down at her notes, untouched since the first 10 minutes, then raised both hands as the audience erupted once again over Caroline Leavitt's last remark. "Enough," she said, voice firmer than before. "We are not going to continue shouting over each other. This is a debate, not a spectacle." The lights above buzzed softly, but the room itself felt frozen, held between gasps. Michelle Obama leaned back slightly, taking a breath, while Caroline, still standing, slowly sat down again, her expression unfazed but watchful. Dr. Monroe's voice softened, but the steel remained. "Millions of Americans are watching tonight not for blood, but for clarity, for something, someone, to help them believe again. That's the job of leaders." Her eyes darted between them. "So I ask both of you, can you show this country what strength and civility look like at the same time? Or are we just here to destroy each other?" There was no immediate answer, just stillness, a flicker of introspection, even in Caroline's eyes. Michelle stared ahead, brows slightly furrowed, while the crowd finally quieted to a low hum. For a moment, it seemed like the temperature in the room had dropped by 10 degrees. Dr. Monroe looked to the producers off stage, then to the audience. "We'll take a brief pause, 2 minutes, and when we return, let's return with purpose." She turned off her mic, exhaled, and whispered under her breath, "This isn't a forum anymore, it's a battlefield." When the cameras returned, the lights seemed harsher, the silence heavier, like the entire auditorium had braced for the next impact. Dr. Monroe offered no preamble this time. "We move forward," she said simply. Caroline Leavitt leaned in, voice low but laced with calculated venom. "Let's stop pretending this is about numbers or border policy. Michelle, you stood by a man who let this country slip into complacency. And now you want to rewrite the past with smiles and speeches." Her tone grew sharper. "Barack Obama gave us empty promises. Trump gave us action. And while you tour talk shows mocking his marriage and his policies, real Americans are out there trying to survive the mess your husband left behind." The words stung. The reference to Michelle's recent appearance on The View, where she had chuckled at the idea of Trump's leadership and questioned the sincerity of his relationship with Melania, now resurfaced like a thrown stone. Michelle straightened her posture, but her smile vanished. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice steady. "I mock no one's marriage. I question hypocrisy, and I question those who claim to be defenders of family values while tearing apart actual families at the border, while promoting cruelty as strength." Caroline didn't flinch. "You don't get to moralize about families," she shot back. "Your husband separated this country in ways it may never recover from: race, class, patriotism. He fractured the trust that President Trump tried to rebuild, and now you parade around like America's conscience when all you've done is cling to the glow of a man who governed in shadows." That hit hard. Michelle's hands gripped the edge of the table. "You think standing beside someone you believe in is weakness?" she asked. "I supported my husband because he stood for decency, for empathy, for reform. You support a man who tears down everything he touches and then calls it strength." Caroline's expression hardened. "I support a man who wins, who fights, who acts, and I don't ride his coattails. I carry his mission forward." She paused, her next words deliberate. "You're not here as a leader, Michelle. You're here as a relic. And tonight, I'm here to bury the past." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Michelle's mouth opened, but no words came immediately. Dr. Monroe's voice pierced the silence. "We are dangerously close to losing what remains of this conversation. Both of you, consider your words carefully." But it was too late. The gloves were off, and the personal lines had been crossed. This wasn't about politics anymore, it was legacy, identity, and survival. The silence that followed was like a fuse burning low, dangerously quiet, seconds from detonation. Caroline Leavitt reached beneath the desk again, pulling out a final document, this one sealed in a red-marked folder. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she slowly opened it, slid a single sheet across the table toward Michelle, and held up a copy toward the camera. "This," she said, her voice calm but cold, "is an ICE briefing from President Obama's final year in office. It lists 2,143 violent crimes, murder, assault, sexual battery, committed by undocumented immigrants who slipped through the system." She paused. "Your system." Michelle's eyes narrowed, but she didn't touch the document. Caroline tapped it once with her finger. "You don't want to look at it because it contradicts the image you've spent years crafting, of a kind, careful administration. But these names, they weren't protected, they were failed, and no matter how many elegant speeches you give, these numbers won't go away." Then, with a swift, rehearsed motion, she dropped the page onto the floor beside the podium. It fluttered, landing face up, visible to cameras and audience alike. The symbolic gesture wasn't subtle. It was surgical. A paper drop, not a mic drop. But it hit with the same finality. Michelle stared at the page for a moment longer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer but frayed around the edges. "You think waving numbers and fear makes you righteous," she said. "But what you've done tonight isn't reveal truth. It's weaponize pain. And I won't dignify that with performance." She turned to the audience. "These aren't just statistics. They're stories. And no, I won't pick them up off the floor to score a point." Caroline leaned back, a satisfied smile crossing her face. She didn't need Michelle to pick it up. She'd already dropped the weight, and America had watched it fall. The final segment began with no fanfare, just the low thrum of tension that had built to a breaking point. Dr. Monroe, her voice slightly hoarse, turned to the women one last time. In closing, she said, "What does the future of America look like under your vision?" Michelle Obama took a breath, slow and intentional. Her voice, though clearly worn, held a trace of the calm that once inspired millions. "The future of this country," she said, "must be rooted in grace, in listening, in rebuilding trust where it's been shattered. It won't come from yelling the loudest or deporting the fastest. It will come from lifting those who've been ignored, healing what's been broken, and refusing to let fear drive the American dream." She paused, scanning the crowd. "This isn't about Trump or Obama anymore. It's about whether we choose compassion over cruelty, unity over vengeance." The audience erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs, but before the sound could settle, Caroline Leavitt leaned into her mic. "That's a beautiful sentiment," she said, "but we've tried that already, and what did it give us? Borders in chaos, families crushed under regulation, enemies emboldened. America isn't saved by speeches, it's saved by action, and Donald Trump proved that." Her voice turned harder. "The future of this country isn't looking backward through a nostalgic lens. It's moving forward with strength. The days of polite decline are over. It's time for unapologetic leadership." She stood, letting her final words hang. You say unity, I say results. You say dignity, I say defense. And I won't apologize for standing for a country that's tired of losing. She glanced toward Michelle with one last cut. You had your era, this is ours. For a second, neither woman moved. No rebuttal, no applause. Just the sound of a nation being asked to choose, not just between two leaders, but between two futures. The lesson from this story isn't just about politics. It's about the power of presence, preparation, and the clash of philosophies in a divided nation. On one side stood Michelle Obama, a symbol of dignity, empathy, and experience. On the other, Caroline Leavitt, young, unrelenting, and armed with facts like weapons. Their confrontation was more than a debate. It was a reflection of America's internal struggle: heart versus grit, legacy versus disruption, speeches versus sound bites. What we learn is that in today's hypervisual, emotionally charged world, winning a public battle isn't always about being right, it's about commanding the moment. Caroline came prepared not just with data but with strategy, with calculated escalation and unflinching confidence. Michelle held on to compassion and principle, but sometimes grace is drowned out by volume. Still, the deeper truth is this: leadership isn't defined by how loud you speak, it's by what you leave behind when the lights go out. And while Leavitt may have dominated the stage, the story leaves a haunting question. In defending truth, must we sacrifice civility? In a divided world, the lesson is clear: how we fight for our beliefs matters just as much as what we're fighting for.